pain becomes unbearable, not because of what happened, because of what you believed would never happen. Pain often feels overwhelming, not because of the event itself, but because of the silent expectations that existed long before the moment arrived. These expectations are rarely spoken out loud. In fact, most of the time, you are not even aware that you are creating them. They form quietly, shaped by your desires, your past experiences, and your need for stability and meaning. You begin to assume that certain people will stay, that certain situations will continue, and that life will unfold in a way that feels safe and predictable. When reality moves in a different direction, it does not just create discomfort, it creates a deep sense of inner disruption. The mind struggles to accept what has happened because it was already committed to a different version of reality. This inner conflict is where the intensity of pain begins to grow. You are not only dealing with what is happening now, but also with the collapse of what you believed would happen. There is a kind of emotional investment that develops when expectations are present. You begin to attach feelings, meaning, and even parts of your identity to an outcome that has not yet fully unfolded. You start to feel secure, not because something is guaranteed, but because you have convinced yourself that it is. This illusion of certainty becomes a foundation, and when that foundation breaks, it feels as though something inside you has been taken away. What makes this even more powerful is that expectations often come from a place of trust. You trust a person, a situation, or even your own judgment. You believe that your understanding of things is accurate. So when that trust is shaken, it does not just affect how you see the situation. It affects how you see yourself. You begin to question your decisions, your perceptions, and even your worth. The pain expands beyond the moment and starts to touch deeper layers of your inner world. There is also a subtle sense of control hidden within expectations. When you expect something to happen, you feel as though you have some level of influence over the outcome. It creates a sense of order in an otherwise unpredictable life. But reality does not operate based on personal expectations. It moves according to its own nature, often indifferent to what you hoped for or believed in. When this truth becomes clear, it can feel harsh, almost like a personal rejection, even though it is simply the nature of life unfolding. Another layer of this pain comes from the gap between imagination and reality. In your mind, you may have already lived through certain outcomes. You may have imagined conversations, future moments, or a sense of continuity that brought you comfort. These imagined experiences feel real on an emotional level. So when reality does not match them, it feels like losing something that already existed, even if it never truly did. This makes the pain more confusing because you are grieving something that was partly created within you. Over time, these broken expectations force you to confront something deeper. They reveal how much of your emotional stability was placed in things that were never fully in your control. They show how easily the mind creates certainty where none truly exists. And in that realization, there is a quiet but powerful shift beginning to take place. Attachment is subtle. It does not always appear as something intense or obvious. In many cases, it feels like care, like love, like connection. You tell yourself that what you feel is natural, that it is human to hold on to people, to moments, to experiences that bring comfort. And this is true to a certain extent. But beneath that surface, attachment begins to form in a way that is deeper and more binding than you realize. It starts when you no longer simply appreciate something, but begin to rely on it. The difference is quiet, almost invisible. Appreciation allows space. It allows things to come and go without disturbing your inner balance. Attachment, on the other hand, begins to close that space. It creates a sense of needing, a sense that without this person or situation, something inside you would feel incomplete. As this attachment grows, your emotional state becomes increasingly tied to something outside of you. Your mood begins to shift based on their presence or absence. Your sense of peace becomes dependent on how things unfold. Without noticing it, you slowly give away control over your inner stability. What once felt like a simple connection now becomes a source of vulnerability. When something changes, when the person pulls away, when the situation no longer aligns with your expectations, the pain that arises is not just about the loss itself. It is about the part of you that had become dependent. It is about the gap that suddenly appears where something once felt secure. The stronger the attachment, the deeper that gap feels. There is also a tendency within attachment to create an idealized version of what you are holding on to. You begin to focus on what it gives you, how it makes you feel, what it represents in your life. Over time, this image becomes more refined, more perfect, and less connected to reality. You are no longer relating to things as they are, but as you want them to be. This makes any form of change feel even more painful because it is not just reality that is shifting. It is the collapse of an image you built within your mind. Attachment also carries a hidden fear, the fear of losing what you have become emotionally connected to. Even when things are going well, this fear can quietly exist in the background. It creates tension, a subtle anxiety that something might go wrong. Instead of fully experiencing the present moment, part of your awareness becomes focused on preserving it, holding it in place, trying to make it last longer than it naturally would. This effort to hold on is where suffering begins to take root. Life, by its nature, is constantly changing. Everything moves, everything evolves, everything eventually transforms or fades. When you resist this movement, when you try to fix something in place, you create friction between your expectations and reality. This friction is experienced as emotional pain. What makes attachment even more powerful is that it often becomes part of your identity. You begin to define yourself through what you are attached to. It becomes a reference point for who you are, how you see your life, and where you believe your happiness comes from. So when that attachment is threatened or lost, it does not just feel like something external is gone. It feels like a part of you has been taken away. In that moment, the pain intensifies because it is no longer just about letting go of something outside, but also about facing the emptiness within that was once filled by it. Pain has a way of revealing what comfort tries to hide. When everything feels stable, you rarely question where your sense of happiness, peace, or worth is coming from. You move through life, assuming that how you feel is natural, that it simply belongs to you. But when something is taken away, when a situation shifts or a person is no longer there in the same way, a deeper truth begins to surface. You start to notice that your emotional state was not as independent as you once believed. There were invisible connections, quiet dependencies that shaped how you felt each day. These dependencies were not always obvious because they blended into your routine, into your sense of normal. You may have believed that you were in control of your emotions. But in reality, many of them were being influenced by something outside of you. When that external source changes or disappears, the effect is immediate. The peace you once felt becomes unstable. The happiness you experienced begins to fade. And in that moment, it becomes clear that what you thought was internally grounded was actually externally supported. This realization can feel uncomfortable, even unsettling, because it challenges the way you understand yourself. There is often a tendency to resist this awareness. The mind looks for reasons outside, searching for someone or something to blame. It tries to restore the old sense of stability by focusing on what was lost rather than what is being revealed. But if you stay with the discomfort, if you observe it without trying to escape, you begin to see something important. You begin to recognize the specific areas where a dependency existed. It might be emotional validation, where you relied on someone else's words or actions to feel valued. It might be a sense of belonging, where your identity was tied to being part of a certain connection or environment. It could even be a form of distraction, where something or someone helped you avoid facing parts of yourself that felt uncertain or incomplete. These dependencies are not a sign of weakness. They are simply patterns that developed over time, often without conscious awareness. The mind naturally seeks comfort and security, and when it finds something that provides that feeling, it holds on to it. But the problem arises when that comfort becomes a necessity rather than a preference. Pain interrupts this pattern. It removes the external support and leaves you facing what remains. At first, this can feel like emptiness, like something essential is missing. But within that emptiness, there is clarity. You begin to see what you were leaning on, what you were using to stabilize yourself, and how much influence it had over your inner world. This clarity creates an opportunity. Not an easy one, but a meaningful one. It allows you to question whether you want your sense of peace to be dependent on something that is constantly changing. It invites you to look inward, to explore what it means to develop a form of stability that does not rely on external conditions. As you sit with this understanding, a shift begins to take place. You start to separate what is truly yours from what was borrowed. You notice how certain emotions were triggered, how certain reactions were shaped, and how much of your experience was connected to something beyond your control. In this process, awareness deepens. And with that awareness, there is a gradual movement toward a different kind of strength, one that is not easily shaken by the changing nature of life. Discomfort is something most people are conditioned to avoid. From an early age, the mind learns to move away from anything that feels heavy, uncertain, or emotionally painful. It seeks relief, distraction, explanation, or escape. So when discomfort arises, especially emotional discomfort, the natural reaction is to resist it. The instinct is to fix it quickly, to change the situation, to numb the feeling, or to convince yourself that it is not that serious. But discomfort has a different nature when you stop resisting it. When you remain present with it, something unexpected begins to happen. Instead of increasing endlessly, it starts to reveal layers. What initially feels like one solid wave of pain begins to break into smaller parts. And within those parts, you begin to see the structure of your own mind more clearly. Sitting with discomfort means allowing experience to exist without immediately trying to control it. It means observing what is happening internally without adding extra interpretation or judgment. At first, this can feel very unstable. The mind is not used to staying with uncertainty. It prefers clarity, even if that clarity is based on illusion. So, when you choose to remain still within discomfort, you are going against a deeply ingrained habit. In that stillness, thoughts become more visible. You start to notice how quickly the mind reacts, how it creates stories around what is happening, how it tries to assign meaning to everything in order to regain a sense of control. You may observe memories arising, comparisons forming, or imagined scenarios playing out. All of this is the mind's attempt to escape the raw experience of simply feeling. But when you do not follow every thought, when you do not act on every emotional impulse, something subtle begins to shift. The intensity of the discomfort may still be present, but your relationship to it changes. You are no longer completely identified with it. Instead of being inside the pain, you start to become aware of it. This awareness creates space, and in that space, understanding begins to emerge. You start to see that discomfort is not random. It is connected to specific attachments, expectations, fears, and unresolved patterns within you. Each sensation carries information. Each emotional reaction points towards something deeper that has not yet been fully understood. The tendency to avoid discomfort often keeps these patterns hidden. When you constantly escape difficult emotions, you also escape the insight they carry. The pain may temporarily disappear, but the underlying cause remains unexamined. So it tends to repeat itself in different forms, in different situations, until it is finally faced directly. When you stay with discomfort instead of running from it, you begin to interrupt this cycle. The experience becomes less about suffering and more about observation. You notice how the intensity rises and falls. You see how certain thoughts amplify the feeling, while silence softens it. You begin to understand that much of what feels overwhelming is not just the emotion itself, but the resistance to it. Over time, this practice of staying present changes the way you relate to inner experiences. You become less reactive. You start to recognize that emotions are temporary states, not fixed identities. Even the most intense feelings begin to lose their absolute power over you when they are observed directly without avoidance. Within this process, there is a quiet transformation taking place. The discomfort that once felt like something to escape starts to become something that reveals. It reveals patterns of thinking, emotional dependencies, and hidden fears that were previously unnoticed. And through this revelation, a deeper understanding of yourself begins to form, one that is not based on avoidance, but on direct experience. True strength is often misunderstood. Many people associate strength with control, dominance, emotional suppression, or the ability to remain unaffected by external situations. But real inner strength is something far quieter and more grounded. It is not about controlling life, but about remaining stable within yourself, regardless of how life changes around you. When your sense of peace depends on external validation, approval, or outcomes, your stability becomes fragile. Every situation then has the power to disturb you. A change in someone's behavior, a shift in circumstances, or the loss of something meaningful can easily shake your inner balance. This is because your center is not truly within you. It is placed outside. Nor independence begins when you start to notice this pattern. You observe how often your emotions rise and fall based on external conditions. You see how quickly the mind reacts when something does not go as expected. And slowly, you begin to question whether this constant dependence is necessary or whether there is another way to live. To where developing inner independence does not mean disconnecting from people or experiences. It does not mean becoming emotionally cold or detached from life. Instead, it means learning how to remain rooted in yourself while still engaging with the world. You can care deeply without losing yourself. You can love without becoming dependent. You can participate in life without letting it define your entire sense of being. This shift does not happen instantly. It begins with awareness. You start to notice moments where you are seeking approval, where you are waiting for someone else's response to feel secure, or where your mood is influenced by external feedback. Instead of immediately reacting, you begin to observe these moments. This observation creates a small but important space between you and your reaction. In that space, something new becomes possible. Instead of automatically depending on external validation, you begin to return to yourself. You start asking whether what you feel is truly coming from within or being shaped by outside influence. This questioning is subtle, but it gradually weakens the automatic patterns of dependency. As inner independence develops, your emotional stability becomes less fragile. Situations that once had the power to completely disturb you begin to lose their intensity. Not because the situations change, but because your center of gravity shifts inward. You are no longer constantly pulled in different directions by external events. There is also a deep change in the way you relate to loss. When you are heavily dependent on external sources for happiness, loss feels devastating because it feels like losing a part of yourself. But as inner independence grows, loss is still felt, but it does not completely dismantle your inner state. There is sadness, but not collapse. There is disappointment, but not destruction of identity. This stability allows you to experience life more fully. When you are not constantly afraid of losing your peace, you can engage with life more openly. You are no longer holding on tightly to every moment or trying to control every outcome. Instead, there is a sense of ease, even in uncertainty. Inner independence also brings clarity in relationships. You begin to see people more clearly without projecting your emotional needs onto them. You stop expecting others to complete you or stabilize you emotionally. This creates healthier, more honest connections, where interaction is based on presence rather than dependency. Over time, this way of being becomes more natural. You no longer have to consciously remind yourself to stay grounded. The mind slowly learns that stability does not have to come from outside conditions. It begins to rest in itself, even when external circumstances shift. In the end, what you once called pain was never just about loss. It was about awareness slowly rising through experience. What broke you was not meant to define you, but to reveal how much of your peace was placed outside of yourself. Every expectation that collapsed, every attachment that loosened, every discomfort that could no longer be avoided was pointing you back to one simple truth. You were never meant to depend so completely on what changes. There comes a moment when understanding replaces confusion, and silence feels more honest than reaction. In that silence, you begin to recognize that nothing was truly taken from you that was meant to stay aligned with your inner stability. What left was showing you where you were leaning too far outward, where you had forgotten your own center. And slowly, without force, you begin to return. Not to who you were before the pain, but to someone who sees more clearly, feels more deeply, and depends less on what cannot be controlled.